universe will speak, manifest. This I be, my angel, for all to see. Will speak, manifest. This I need, my angel, for all to see, manifest. This I be, my angel. The universe will speak, manifest. This I need, my angel, for all to see.
All right, hello everyone. Looks like we got quite a few. Oh, we got quite a few folks here, a couple hundred already. That's great to see. Welcome to Secrets of Saturn. On this week, we are going to be discussing the document Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. Joining me is Wayne McCroy, Crow 777, and the Great Baldini. Before we get started, though, I'm going to do our sponsorship from Randy from Houston with Lower the Friction. Did you know that 85% of your engine wear occurs at startup? Yes, that is correct. And this is where Lower the Friction comes in by putting a protective, lubricating barrier on all moving parts. This now gives you full-time protection to make your engine last longer, run smoother, give you better performance, and improved fuel economy. People across the country are reporting some very exciting results. Go to lowerthefriction.com, place your order, and enter in promo code SOS to get 5% off of your order. That's lowerthefriction.com. Alrighty, and remember, if you use the product, we would love to hear from you and about your results. So anyway, all right, gentlemen, are we ready to get into this document?
I think we're ready. Let's do a little roll call here first. Gravy Jesus?
Present.
Gravy Jesus.
Bird Guy?
And Holy Crow?
Bird Guy, Shiny Miller? You guys
I'm going to bed, man. I can't hang out with you guys anymore.
Oh, heavens. All right.
Gravy phasers on stun? Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
Get
With
your
this document, I
labels
think we're
ready.
going for level 10 here.
Oh yeah, it's on kill tonight.
I'd only looked at parts of this, and I finally went through the whole thing today. I'm just like, oh, this is what's going on right now.
You've not read it in its entirety before, Jason?
I hadn't. I'd listened to people discuss it and break it down. Bill Cooper did a good job of it.
But
But
been so happy.
No, we took. I know, Jason. We took excerpts a couple times. That's how I remembered that we'd read it, because we took stuff out of that for other shows.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, I was familiar with it. I just hadn't gone through the thing like beginning to end. So I found a narration of it. So while I was driving around earlier, I can listen to it and just try and absorb it.
You could have a better time watching the movie Saw 6.
I don't know what everybody's talking about. Is there something playing in the background that I'm completely and utterly unaware of? I don't know. I'm seeing things in the chat room. Is there stuff playing besides us talking? Because there's nothing on my board here.
I don't know. We got requests. We got some Skinner. Freebird.
Yeah, man. I mean, I can grab the acoustic, but I don't think that's why everybody's here.
If I leave here tomorrow.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Wayne McCroy.
That'll get you censored. Let's just do Freebird to heaven.
Hey, Wayne, what'd you do with the money?
The money?
The money your mom gave you for singing lessons.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh.
No,
Gravy
I
Jesus
never
feels
had
bad
that
for
money
you.
You blew it, Wayne. You should have said I spent it all on hair treatment. You dropped the ball there.
Oh,
Come on.
Hey, man, I had a lot of hair back in the day, so.
He teed you up, man. He teed you up.
Hey, when I start hawking hair care products, you know it's going to get serious.
All right, guys. Are we talking about
You know,
something here, or is this like...
Man, we got to have some levity, Crow, because this is some serious poop here.
Yeah, we're about to start getting into some serious stuff here. So I'll do a quick explanation. Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars is a document that supposedly came from inside sources and that was found left on a copy machine back in the 80s. Supposedly this document is from 1979. The beginning reads as thus: Operations Research Technical Manual. Welcome aboard. This publication marks the 25th anniversary of the Third World War, called the Quiet War, being conducted using subjective biological warfare fought with silent weapons. This book contains an introductory descriptions of this war, its strategies, and its weaponry. And the predominance of this, to give everyone a point of view to look at, is social engineering on many, many levels. I think that's a fair way to start this. Gentlemen, anybody want to
talk to you? Yeah.
Wayne, Crow, anybody?
Yeah, okay. Well, we could start, just breaking this down. If you look, let's go right to the first paragraph here. It is patently impossible to discuss social engineering or the automation of a society, i.e., the engineering of social automation systems, silent weapons, in parentheses it says, on a national or worldwide scale without implying extensive objectives of social control and destruction of human life, i.e. slavery and genocide. And I think that kind of says it all in that first sentence right there, doesn't it?
Yeah, it just cuts to the chase. I'll continue the next line. We're just going to pass off here. This would be like, be like CSI or something. We're just going to expository. But the manual is in itself an analog declaration of intent.
Boom.
Boom. Such a writing must be secured from public scrutiny. Otherwise, it might be recognized as a technically formal declaration of domestic war. Furthermore, when any person or group of persons in a position of great power and without full knowledge and consent of the public uses such knowledge and methodologies for economic conquest, it must be understood that a state of domestic warfare exists between said person or group of persons and the public. And I think that is fairly directly stated. Couldn't be more clear.
Is that when we got the gold fringe flag? Was that the first? No,
that goes way back.
I'm making a joke here.
Yeah.
Thanks, Learning to Fly. And Rachel New York Truth wants more F-bombs, please, Crow. Apparently, you amused a lot of people with your little slip.
All right, here we go. I'll give her one. Fugazi.
Oh, no.
Falconelli, eh?
Anthony Fauci.
Fakakta.
Bless you.
Right about it.
So, continuing on with this, the solution of today's problems requires an approach which is ruthlessly candid, with no agonizing over religious, moral, or cultural values. You have qualified for this project because of your ability to look at human society with cold objectivity, and yet analyze and discuss your observations and conclusions with others of similar intellectual capacity without the loss of discretion or humility. Such virtues are exercised in your own best interest. Do not deviate from them. So this thing starts off with a great big hug.
Yeah. Yeah. The analogies, again, so did you clarify that this was supposed to have come off a copy machine?
Right.
That's where it came from. Apparently, is that the vast majority of it, anyway, it came from a copy machine that was sold at surplus, an IBM copier that came from government surplus. And I will say that the premise of that is fully that's really well within the bounds of probability, or at least capability. The way that those machines worked in the day, there was a drum inside them that you could pull up to 10,000 pages of it based on the way that the toner and the film worked. So, so from that time period, it's highly plausible that's a legitimate and document.
Well, if this is a fabrication, somebody knew what the hell they were talking about to fabricate it.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we were talking about before the show is that its analogies, and we'll go through some of these, that it draws with electrical circuitry, and using electrical circuitry as an analog for logistics in terms of societal control is one-to-one and absolutely viable. So even if it were a fabricated document, all of the material contained within is absolutely plausible, and moreover, much the same way that we see in the protocols of the elders of Zion, which has largely been discredited. Yet we see these one-to-one throughout history. That and certainly this is a much closer proximity to us in timeline. Supposedly began in the late 1940s following post-World War II, and that's where these ideas came from. But we can see every single one of these things having manifested itself, at least in Western society, since.
You know, there's a point I would make on the Taylor analog observation. Have you guys seen this clip where, I hate to use the word millennials, but young people who have only known the digital age, they're given a rotary phone and they're given 4 minutes to dial the number.
They have no idea what to do with it.
Well, it's that normally, you look at that,
great.
you laugh, but this is what dawned on me, and this is the scary part about what you just said about the analog and the circuit. The people who've grown up that never knew the analog age don't have the mechanical mindset that we that were there did. As an example, they didn't know to pick up the phone because you have to complete a circuit of some sort before anything analog works. So in their minds, they're messing with the dial, thinking, oh, there's memory. You see what I'm getting at here? They don't have the analog mechanical knowledge to understand how all that stuff works. And so in a way, they're going to be oblivious to certain forms of programming because of that lack of knowledge.
And that's clearly spelled out within this. And one of the items that they clearly point out is keeping the education system a complete mess, so that young people, even if they are bright enough, they have such a poor education that they can't figure it out. And again, when you see some of the elements within this document, if you're not familiar with it, this is one of those things that for me, I find it's kind of hard to recommend, because it'll shake you up if you're not familiar with it, and it is certainly not a happy, fluffy bunny hug a unicorn kind of thing. But it is a real eye opener. And again, if you're unfamiliar with it, it is something that is definitely must reading for people to see the scope of what is happening.
Right, and this whole document is nothing but a nuts and bolts kind of manual for how this stuff works, how to achieve these different aims, the different methods that they use. They even have algorithms in this document. It's even got all the algorithms shown, how they figure this stuff out. And this is based primarily on energy science, and that's the correlation that they make here. They compare everything to energy science and say that mathematics is the primary energy science, and they equate all this stuff one-to-one with electrical current and how that works, and they apply it to economic factors and social control factors. Sure. So this is what they're doing. This is the control system. They have algorithms for this stuff, and this document outlines exactly how this stuff works in a nuts and bolts kind of way, and how it's these silent weapons, quote unquote, are used against society or the masses, and the effects that they look to achieve with it. And it's also, just as it says right in the document itself, it says it's an analog declaration of intent. Now, a full disclosure behind this document, a gentleman came out in 2003. His name's Hartford Van Dyke, and he claimed authorship of this document. Now, he didn't say that this is fake. In fact, he said quite the opposite. He said this is all very real stuff. And all I could find out about this guy is he worked for the government. At the time he did this interview, he was in a federal prison for something related to a federal government crime or something like that. And, he had also written some other things that were very eye-opening. One of them, I think, is called Skeletons in Uncle Sam's Closet or something like that. That talks about how the administration in 1941 had foreknowledge of the Pearl Harbor attack and how that was all
proven now. That's
yeah,
pretty much shown.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But he's also the author of that document as well, that book. I forget the exact title of it. It's something like Skeletons in Uncle Sam's Closet or something. People could look that one up too.
So who is this cat supposed to be? Because it sounds like he really knew what he was doing.
Probably
I don't
someone
know.
who the government probably got nervous after they read his document and they wanted to use it and realized he could overthrow them. So they threw him in the clink.
Colonel Clink. If you don't mind, I'll just add its own historical introduction here, at least part of it, and we can go on from there. The historical context here is that, and this is from the document, silent weapon technology has evolved from operations research, a strategic and tactical methodology developed under the military management in England during World War II. The original purpose of operations research was to study the strategic and tactical problems of air and land defense with the objective of effective use of limited military resources against foreign enemies. Logistics, essentially. It was soon recognized that those in positions of power, that the same methods might be used for totally controlling a society, but better tools were necessary.
Hold it right there, because right there, this is exactly everything that was already building up with people like Bernays. They were seeing how things that were done in the beginning of the 20th century, World War I, and Bernays' techniques kind of things, they took that and said, hey, look what we can do. So anyway, what does the next paragraph start with? Something that Crow and I have discussed a zillion times. Go ahead if you want to keep reading.
You've heard the term before, social engineering, the analysis and automation of a society, and again, this is using a cybernetic feedback loop, requires the correlation in great amounts of constantly changing economic information, or data. Now we would call that metadata. So a high-speed computerized data processing system was necessary, which could race ahead of the society and predict where society would arrive for capitulation. Again, you'll just bookmark here and say, again, this is a conversation that I had with Crow and Jason on Crow 777 Radio, episodes 154 and 156, about data collection and what they do with it, creating simulation models. And this is exactly what we're talking about here, except for, again, this was dated in 1976, but the original premise came in 1948. Relay computers were too slow, but the electronic computer, invented in 1946 by J. Presper Eckert and John W. Mauchly, filled the bill. And we're back to the document here. The next breakthrough was the development of the simplex method of linear programming in 1947 by mathematician George Danzig. In 1948, the transistor, invented by Bardeen, Britton, and Shockley, promised great expansion of the computer field by reducing space and power requirements. And again, remember that up until this time, they were using either mechanical systems with mechanical relays, or they began to use vacuum tubes. It wasn't until the transistor that they could really get processing power going.
And if you want to see just how really early computers were, the movie starring Benedict Cumberbatch about the computer that they invented to...
Turing, right?
I'm sorry?
Turing. Yes.
Yeah, he played Turing, but the computer that they invented at the Institute in England to crack the Enigma code, you can see just what they were working with, which wasn't a whole hell of a lot. And it was huge. It was taking up a giant wall in a warehouse.
But keeping in mind that the earliest computers, which were physical mechanical computers, were actually done they had working models in the mid 1800s, and a couple of written prognosis for them in the late 1700s, where they didn't really have the tooling to do it, but somebody had written up how to do it in the late 1700s. So this has been on the books for quite a long time.
If you think about this at its basic roots, you can look at the idea of magic by simply looking at wisdom of the crowd and the law of large numbers, which is what built Vegas. So that's like the lowest kind of simplest magical version of predicting the future accurately. But what I was thinking is, it's kind of like you said, a probability loop. What if you could get, like, say, 1 million people to agree not to do next what they normally would do next. In other words, to consciously say, well, I was going to go outside, but I'm going to wait a few minutes before I do that. Or, I was going to shop today, but I won't. I'll shop tomorrow. You suppose that would break the probability prediction?
To a degree, I think you'd have to get enough people to get a tipping point. But I've been a big proponent of by people, if they live internally and connected to the natural world rather than the artificial world, which is presented to us, and come from a position of love, that is the precise opposite. It confounds the system, and the more people to do that, I think that has the best chance of breaking the system. You need enough people with intent, but I think you can. Yes.
I wonder, because I've thought about things like, what if everyone agreed not to use a clock and they had a sundial in their yard? So just do everything the way you were gonna, the time you were gonna do it, but do it to the sun, to the natural system. I just wonder if that would break a probability.
I'd like to take some, put together a time and get everybody that we can with our bridge building and networking and in the truth community, and consciously have intention and focus on something at a particular time over a particular time period, and see what we can accomplish.
I'm with you. I don't doubt that there would be an effect there. I think there would be an immeasurable effect.
I would be shocked if there wasn't something, right?
So would I. Yeah.
Right, and another thing we need to look at with this all corresponds 1-to-1 exactly with the rise and advent of cybernetics and artificial intelligence.
Absolutely.
All of these things were coming on board right around this time frame within the late 1940s and early 1950s. So all this stuff is hand in hand. These technologies came out right on time. They knew exactly what they wanted to do with them. The intent behind this was already there for artificial intelligence and everything else.
I would go so far to say, Wayne, that much of that was driven by this as the intention, that this was the driving factor to get us there. And then what we came up with later, much like we see now with increases in computer processing power, is that they have to give us a reason to purchase it. Like graphics becomes kind of a heavy process heavy thing. But before that, for email and spreadsheets and that sort of stuff, we don't need that kind of processing power. So they have to come up with apps that require it. But I would go so far as to say that this was the driving force between much of the computing technology that we currently see today. And
right,
certainly,
and I would agree with that.
Well, I was going to say, think about all the people like supposedly who cracked something like Enigma. What they're probably doing almost certainly is they've got people believed you're in this life and death fight, and you've only got till next Thursday to come up with something pretty special. These kinds of ideas. So the people that are actually doing the pushing forward of the technology are very invested in the false narrative that's driving the whole thing.
We got a question from the chat room here. Thanks, John, for the super chat. Has anyone ever gotten into a physical confrontation while discussing these subjects?
I've had people get very hostile, yes.
Yeah, I've had heated arguments, but I've never had a physical confrontation whereas blows were exchanged.
Yeah, it's not my style.
Crow or Wayne, you got anything to say about that?
Not me. I don't do that.
No, I don't either.
I would never let it get to the point.
Exactly. You know what the next word out of your mouth is going to do, so why would you go there?
I've always been afraid of getting into a physical confrontation with somebody, especially if they're weaker than me. I took martial arts a long time ago, so I know how to do some things, but my discipline is so gone that I'd be afraid of doing something and seriously injuring somebody and highly regret it. So the last thing I would ever want to do is go near a physical confrontation.
Yeah, unintended consequences for sure.
Exactly. Yes, I know how to do some of these strikes and how to seriously injure somebody. No, I haven't practiced in a long time, so what if I seriously screw up? Don't want to go there. Just don't even want to come close to going there. So, continuing on with this, we've got the three things that they needed to get their computer systems up and running. Of course, we know today that data is king. That's something else that Crow and I have discussed many times, that the new oil is data. I think that's the way we were describing it even, 3 or 4 years ago, Crow?
Yeah, as the lead up to the China stuff that we did, we were saying money's not king anymore, and it's never going to be a king. Data will be king from here forward.
So, okay, here we go. Same old names. Immediately, the Rockefeller Foundation got in on the ground floor by making a 4-year grant to Harvard College, which, I will remind everyone, shortly around this time is when Henry Kissinger was there. And Crow and I are going to be recording that episode very soon. We have a detailed breakdown of what that guy did. They funded the Harvard Economic Research Project for the study of the structure of the American economy. 1 year later, in 1949, the United States Air Force joined in. So you can see they are already, as early as 48, 49, breaking down how what at the time would be modern Western society. They know how to manipulate the ebbs and flows, or at least they thought they did. And, that's about when you could see them starting to make things go wonky.
Yeah, and you look and see, this is actually, right here, this is foundational. This is collusion between the military, academia, and guess who else? The Rockefeller Foundation, who was steering and funding it all. And this is exactly how things get done now. You combine these things together and you set policy. And who sets the policy? The financier. Who's the financier? Well, it's this foundation, this tax-free foundation.
Yeah, sure. Rockefeller, backed by Rothschild, backed by the black nobility, backed by who knows.
So
Right.
Continuing on with this, in 1952, the grant period terminated and a high-level meeting of the elite was held to determine the next phase of social operations research. The Harvard Project had been very fruitful, as is borne out by the publication of some of its results in 1953, suggesting the feasibility of economic or social engineering. Name of that is Studies in the Structure of the American Economy, copyright 1953. Engineered in the last half of the decade of the 1940s, the new quiet war machine stood, so to speak, in sparkling, gold-plated hardware on the showroom floor by 1954. With the creation of the Maser, M-A-S-E-R, in 1954, the promise of unlocking unlimited sources of fusion atomic energy from the heavy hydrogen in seawater and the consequent availability of unlimited social power was a possibility only decades away. The combination was irresistible. The Quiet War was quietly declared by the international elite at a meeting held in 1954. That meeting, I can
And
only
does
assume, by the
anybody want
way,
to know what meeting that is?
there you go. That was the year of the first Bilderberg meeting. Although
And
the
that is
silent
exact
weapon
meeting
system,
where this was decided. Sorry,
Did the-
Jason, go ahead.
Did the burgers ever build anything that actually mattered?
1 billion sold. I don't know. Although the silent weapons
Exactly.
system was nearly exposed 13 years later, the evolution of the new weapon system has never suffered any major setbacks, and I would think that's probably to this day. This volume marks the 25th anniversary of the beginning of the Quiet War, and again, this document is supposed to be 1979, so that 1954 date, that makes 25 years. Already, this domestic war has had many victories on many fronts throughout the world.
Yeah, the one primary thing as we go through this document, it's all related to energy. And another analogous word for energy is power.
Power. Unlimited power.
Yeah.
All right, political introduction. In 1954, it was well recognized by those in positions of authority that it was only a matter of time, a few decades, before the general public would be able to grasp and upset the cradle of power, for the very elements of the new silent weapon technology were as accessible for a public utopia as they were for providing a private utopia. The issue of primary concern, that of dominance, revolved around the subject of the energy sciences.
And you could see the intent of what the people who were steering this whole thing had in mind. Dominance, full spectrum dominance. Can't say it enough. That's exactly what's going on today. Full spectrum dominance. That's why you're out in public right now wearing a mask, showing your subservience. Full spectrum dominance.
Yeah, and when people say, follow the money, money is secondary or tertiary. They can print as much as they want. It all comes down to power and control.
Well, it's a good example. What they're actually doing with money right now shows the importance of money. It's just a plaything, isn't it? They just print it and give it out.
Well,
But
as it is clearly laid out in this document, as we get far enough through it, and certainly if you read it yourself, it is but one of the energy sources, and it's meant for control. It is literally a form of slavery.
As we went into this, people, right before all this happened, people remembered the biggest expenditure of all time, or so it was claimed under Bush for the bank bailout. Was that $600 billion or something like that? I forget. It's claimed that as this thing started, by the time March 12th was here, they were printing that much money every hour and dishing it out somewhere to the central banks and everywhere else. So people should understand money is just a thing they make up. It has nothing more than tool usage as the driving force.
Right. And later in this document, sorry.
Go ahead, man.
I was going to say later in this document, it's going to talk about the way that they compare these economic factors and this whole use of money to electrical currents. And this is actually, we'll get there a little later, but I'm just going to read the little thing since we're on the subject right now. If anybody's wondering what is the whole point in this whole economic stimulus package right now, why are they doing that? Here's exactly why. Okay, right here in this paragraph, right from this document, economic inductance. An electrical indicator, let me start over there. An electrical inductor, e.g. a coil or wire, has an electric current as its primary phenomenon and a magnetic field as its secondary phenomenon, inertia. Corresponding to this, an economic inductor has a flow of economic value as its primary phenomenon and a population field as its secondary field phenomenon of inertia. When the flow of economic value, e.g. money, diminishes, the human population field collapses in order to keep the economic value, money, flowing. An extreme case of this would be war. This public inertia is a result of consumer buying habits, expected standard of living, etc., and is generally a phenomenon of self-preservation. So when you consider they're flooding the economy with all this money so that people will go and spend this money, but actually that's not exactly why, because they know people are just going to hang on to this money. And you can see what's going on in society around us, how they're talking about food shortages and everything else, and they've shut down like the entire economy. So what they're trying to do is collapse the population field. Okay,
yeah, exactly.
So that's exactly what it's going to lead to, and that's why they're doing this whole stimulus thing. They're flooding the market with this extra money, which first of all it devalues the money all the more, and causes a baseline price increase in everything, because it's just raising the baseline of everything. That's all it's doing. It's not creating any more value. It's created out of thin air. There's nothing behind it.
And
so
interesting.
When you see that, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, interestingly enough, later in the document, when they're using the algorithm for human population as value, they use it they value it in silver because the dollar is valueless. they clearly state as a fiat currency it has no value, so it's meaningless to assign value in terms of GNP in dollars. Right, so the gross national product has to be in silver because it has at least some. It's tangible.
Every fake system has to have a base in reality, which is why there's a Bible in the courtrooms. They have to base something provable. And so everything Wayne just said is critically important when you consider what Jason and I have been running with Walter Russell. There's only one force in this world. It's called electricity. And even if you want to go into Admiralty and say things like current or flow, you can say the very same words about electricity. And the reason for that is because there's only one force in our world. So when you come to such a foundational doc like the one we're referencing, and what they are using foundationally is an old analog system called electricity, now you begin to understand. Even the fake computer systems, even every fake system we can point to, at the base of it, it has to have a real life connection to something foundationally provable in the real world. In other words, right, a computer cannot run without electricity, which exists. And so in this analog doc where they're showing how they're going to basically hack, fool, and manipulate the world, and by the way, pre-model it so they're 98% sure that it'll work before they do it, they're using electricity. And electricity is the only force in the world. So that's an important connection to understand. Why do they use language like currency? Now you know.
Well, and again, getting back to the idea of energy being power, I could continue on just a little bit from this document that energy is recognized as the key to all activity on Earth. Natural science is the study of the sources and control of natural energy, and social science, theoretically expressed as economics, is the study of the sources and control of social energy. Both are bookkeeping systems, including mathematics. Therefore, mathematics is the primary energy science, and the bookkeeper can be king if the public can be kept ignorant of the methodology of bookkeeping. All science is merely a means to an end. The means is knowledge, the end is control. And beyond this remains only one issue: who's the beneficiary? Who gets control?
So there's a critical thing that you just said there, too, because you're saying that without movement, without energy of some sort, this doesn't work. Well, in the Walter Russell thing, that's another reason. In the title of the thing I run tomorrow, it's going to tell you flat out a Walter Russell quote: all motion is curved and all curvature is spiral. So when you think about these people so they're telling you all these things about energy, but the truth is, in our school that we get, most of us think it's linear from A to B, when in fact they understand that it's closer to something like Russell laid down. So even in the way we try to think about what they're doing, we're misled from the get-go. If motion and energy are the base of this, understanding the true movement of those things would be critical.
Absolutely.
All right, let's go on to the next section, which is energy. Energy is recognized as the key to all activity on Earth. Natural science is the study of the sources and control of natural energy, and social science, theoretically expressed as economics, is the study of the sources and control of social energy. Both are bookkeeping systems. Mathematics. Therefore, mathematics is the primary energy science. And the bookkeeper can be king if the public can be kept ignorant of the methodology of the bookkeeping. Well, that says a whole lot right there, doesn't it? All science is merely a means to an end. And another explosive statement right there. The means is knowledge. The end is control. Beyond this remains only one issue. Who will be the beneficiary? In 1954, this was the issue of primary concern. Although the so-called moral issues were raised, in view of the law of natural selection, it was agreed that a nation or world of people who will not use their intelligence are no better than animals who do not have intelligence. Such people are beasts of burden and stakes on the table by choice and consent. Consequently, in the interest of future world order, peace, and tranquility, it was decided to privately wage a quiet war against the American public with an ultimate objective of permanently shifting the natural and social energy, or wealth, of the undisciplined and irresponsible many into the hands of the self-disciplined, responsible, and worthy few. In order to implement this objective, it was necessary to create, secure, and apply new weapons, which, as it turned out, were a class of weapons so subtle and sophisticated in their principle of operation and public appearance as to earn for themselves the name silent weapons. In conclusion, the objective of economic research, as conducted by the magnates of capital or banking and the industries of commodities or goods and services, is the establishment of an economy which is totally predictable and manipulatable. Think about what that means. In order to achieve a totally predictable economy, the low-class elements of society must be brought under total control, i.e., they must be housebroken, they must be trained, and assigned a yoke and long-term social duties from a very early age before they have an opportunity to question the propriety of the matter. And I might add that this is how they instill whatever point of view that they want you, they, the controllers, want someone to have. They get you from an early age. In order to achieve such conformity, the lower class family unit must be disintegrated by a process of increasing preoccupation of the parents and the establishment of government-operated daycare centers for the occupationally orphaned children. The quality of education given to the lower class must be of the poorest sort, so that the mote of ignorance isolating the inferior class from the superior class is and remains incomprehensible to the inferior class. With such an initial handicap, even bright lower-class individuals have little, if any, hope of extricating themselves from their assigned lot in life. This form of slavery is essential to maintain some measure of social order, peace, and tranquility for the ruling upper class.
You mean psychopath, right? Not
Yep.
upper class. Did
Yeah,
you
I
misread
go.
that? I think that should have said psychopath.
Yeah.
Give that man a cookie. He's 100% right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Elites. Yeah.
Gravy Jesus approves of this message.
Yeah, this is very telling when you look at all this stuff. This explains to people exactly why our education system is the way that it is, and also exactly why the family unit, the traditional family unit, has been targeted and taken apart within our society since the 1950s. This is exactly why. When you look at the time frame when all of this started disintegrating, it was right there, from the mid 1950s right on up through the 60s and the counterculture and that whole social engineer decade, all the way right up into modern times. You see how it was just a slow degradation of what the family structure looks like. And this is exactly why. And you also see why our school system is like it is. This is why they have Common Core math. They don't want you to understand the basic fundamentals of mathematics, the principal energy science.
Right.
That's why.
The part of this makes me think about the language thing. Remember that movie Pygmalion we just referenced? Think about Ebonics. Think about rap. That language barrier makes it impossible for someone to fly under radar. If you're saying words like axe or other things, there's no way
You
can be
automatically
invisible
know
to-
where that person came
Right.
from.
You might as well have a red dot on your forehead. And this is by design. And this is why we see rap guys in this millennium saying teeth instead of teeth, because when these things catch on, what it's basically doing is bean counting you. And if you adopt that way of speech, or you don't have any option, but you've been taught that way, you're not getting out of your beanhole. You'll never be able to fly under radar.
Yes, and this is this exact reason why I consistently say that Latin as a language did not die a natural death. It was murdered, specifically for the reason that it's an explicit language that carries the intention in the verb, and it had so many idioms, axioms, and truisms that were part of the culture that even those, if the general public understood it, we would be a long way toward understanding what's happening around us. So when they stopped the teaching of the trivium, they stopped teaching of any kind of logic and rhetoric.
Gender is in there. Gender is a big part of it. And by the way, I would say murdered is right, but as we know, it never really died, did it? There's never been a time when all scientific papers haven't referenced Latin. So you might ask, who the hell knew the Latin to assign the names to these things? So again, we're looking at a class divide. There are clearly people in the world who were taught Latin.
Yes, and still to this day are, as well as the ancient tales and myths, as you continue to say over and over on your shows, Crow, that when they refuse to teach us the myths, they're refusing to tell us about our past, our history, and the important things.
I suspect when we get into documents like this, the organizations that are behind the authorship, I'll bet you dollars to donuts we can tie them to the Renaissance Vatican. It's my stipulation that period of time that we call the Renaissance is the fall into hypermaterialism. That's where it starts.
I'd even go a step further and say that it was the Jesuit wresting control of all education across the world. And taking over all the sciences and research disciplines as being, considered the smartest guys, so they should be in charge of it. But when they did that, they corrupted everything.
Yeah, actually, you read accounts of these guys, it's insane. Some of these guys supposedly speaking 14 languages, publishing a Bible in a newly found dialect within 2 or 3 years. It's insane to think about how much ability, if any of those accounts are true, how much ability was brought to bear. I don't think we could produce it at this point in time without locating a genius that's so genius he doesn't know how to talk in public.
Yeah, and the current intentional conflation and the pressing of progeneration of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where people believe that they're smart because they can recite or regurgitate badly a little bit of the narrative. They now believe and have conflated the idea that because we have technology, we are now smarter as a race, which is preposterous.
The opposite is true, and the telephone thing I opened up with is the proof. What the digital age has done is separated people so much further from nature, because to use an analog system is to, at some level, be functioning in a natural way. To open a circuit is a natural thing. To understand that you've opened the circuit, but in the digital age, there's no reality to it. It's whatever the dude coded. You push this button for this or that button for that. It's a whole other thing.
Yeah, in this day and age, you don't even really need to know things. You just look it up on your computer or on your smartphone. You could just do a search. You don't really need to know anything, and that's the whole thing. There's
Right.
By and large, this whole generation of people, they have all this knowledge at their fingertips, but they really don't know anything. They don't ever bother to even memorize a person's phone number anymore.
Absolutely. And in
Think
fact,
about it.
it's been proven that through neuroscience and neuroplasticity, things like Google, for example, literally make you stupid because your brain, being really smart, is also very efficient. And so it will, instead of logging and keeping the memory, the information, it simply keeps where the information is found. So instead of learning it, you go, well, I can Google that. So you never actually learn the information. You simply log where that information can be found because it's trying to be efficient. And again, I tell the story that when I worked for an audio manufacturer some 25, almost 30 years ago, we had sales reps and locations, stores all over the world. And at one time, I knew more than 340 phone numbers right off the top of my head because I called them so often. And now I know maybe 5. Right. And for a while, when I had a new phone, I didn't even know my own phone number because I never dialed it. That's pretty sad.
You know, there's another
Right.
part to this. You don't get the cross-pollination. When it's like what Wayne said, what you said, you don't know the information, but you know where to get the information. So you go get it, you use it, and then you're on your way. But you see, there's a critical piece missing when you act in that way, and that's the cross-pollination, the drawing of lines, the association. If
And
you
multi-
research,
yeah.
if you learn a thing in a certain way, then you say, it dawns on you, oh, this relates to that and this, and I'll bet you that's where that name came from. You lose all of that. And so what it becomes is useless information in a bucket. It could be trivia. You could consider information as trivia almost.
Yeah. And
Right,
again,
and then,
go ahead.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say just another facet of that whole idea. Instead of actually knowing the information, you know where to find the information. You know where to go to find the information.
Yes.
Well, here's the other part of that. That's really kind of disturbing. That place that you're going for the information, it's controlled by someone.
It's in a barn wall.
So you have
Yeah.
one person filtering. Yeah, you have one person filtering you this information, and because you don't personally know that information or intake that information because of the whole cross-pollination factor, like Crow was saying, you just take it as to be true just because you know the source that it's coming from. And that's the thing, you don't really know this.
Go to Wikipedia and it constantly changes, right? And so even with sources like the Wayback Machine, even that is compromised. And we certainly know, it's been proven over and over that the highest number of edits from into Wikipedia come from Langley, Virginia. You know what's there. So
There you go.
Well, there's a critical
What's in
point.
Langley, Virginia?
Yeah, we should make a point for people right now. See, what Wayne just pointed out too is when you're using a search engine, it's not that you're just getting siphoned. Whatever they're offering up is the stuff you could search. If you're logged in, they're particularly delivering to you what they want you as a user with a history to see, which brings up another point, which I tell Jason all the time. If you're going to do searches or research or anything, make sure you're not logged in. Never be logged in when you're doing things, because otherwise you're just skewing future search results.
Yep. Yeah, and so then this is what Wayne said, and this is, I'll just kind of segue off that, is what I have frequently said before. The difference between knowledge and understanding is that knowledge is at least knowing the information and being able to store and recall it, but understanding is being able to make use of that information, that you actually have experience in doing it. And I liken this sometimes to the difference between somebody who's read a bunch of books about mountain climbing versus a Sherpa. Which one do you want to take you up the mountain? Right? If you go with the guy who's read a bunch of books, you are going to die. If you go with the Sherpa, you have a chance of making it. And then ultimately what you hope for is wisdom, right? Which is to be able to take that information, both the knowledge and the understanding, and to push it forward and to be able to project out in front of you and make sense of it. And the war on sense making is something that's been going on for a great deal of time, as I track it, for the past 400 or 500 years, that we have been intentionally divorced from the ability to make logical, rational thought, especially ramped up and exponentially over the last 100 years. We have been, especially through technology, completely divorced from our ability to think, and have been suffering from really trauma-based mind control in the form of future shock, where things change so rapidly that we can never adjust to them. And so all we can do is basically become infantilized and look for a parent. And then the government steps in as the parent and taps you on the head and says, good boy, we'll promise you everything and give you nothing.
We got a question from the chat room here. Thanks for the super chat, Guitar Guy Bear. Have any of you looked into black goo? It's in so many movies and also Google in the name. Wayne, I'm sure you have, right?
Yeah, that's something that I've kind of dipped my toe in the water with it and looked at. Basically,
black goo.
Yes, I did. It's called oil. No, but beside the point. Yeah, no. There's maybe something to the whole black goo thing. I think it might relate to some sort of nanotech type of a deal. From what I've seen with it, there's just a whole lot with it, and it's a very hard subject to maneuver through because there's a lot of nonsense mixed in with it. But I mean, there's a real core to the research behind that. That Harold Coates Vela guy has done a lot of looking at the black goo perspective of things, and he, some of the things he says kind of make sense to me and kind of don't make sense to me, but it's not something I've delved real deeply into because, like I said, there's a lot of misinformation to navigate through, and it's not something I've necessarily devoted a lot of time to. But I do find the subject fascinating, and I think it does have, from the descriptions and stuff I've seen of it, some nanotech type applications to it. So I think if there is really a black goo type substance like this, that's probably about 9 out of 10. That's what it is some type of a nanotech.
Yeah, I could agree with that.
That's third for me, and Karen B goes for 4. So,
all right, let's move on to the next section here. Descriptive introduction of the silent weapon. Everything that is expected from an ordinary weapon is expected from a silent weapon by its creators, but only in its own manner of functioning. It shoots situations instead of bullets, propelled by data processing instead of chemical reactions or explosions, originating from bits of data instead of grains of gunpowder, from a computer instead of a gun, operated by a computer programmer instead of a marksman, under the orders of a banking magnate instead of a military general. It makes no obvious explosive noises, causes no obvious physical or mental injuries, and does not obviously interfere with anyone's daily social life. Yet it makes an unmistakable noise, causes unmistakable physical and mental damage, and unmistakably interferes with the daily social life, i.e., unmistakable to a trained observer, one who knows what to look for. The public cannot comprehend this weapon, and therefore cannot believe that they are being attacked and subdued by a weapon. The public might instinctively feel that something is wrong, but that is because of the technical nature of the silent weapon. They cannot express their feeling in a rational way or handle the problem with intelligence. Therefore, they do not know how to cry for help and do not know how to associate with others to defend themselves against it. When a silent weapon is applied gradually, the public adjusts, adapts to its presence, and learns to tolerate its encroachment on their lives. Pay attention here, folks. Until the pressure, psychological via economic, becomes too great and they crack up. Therefore, the silent weapon is a type of biological warfare. It attacks the vitality, options, and mobility of the individuals of a society by knowing, understanding, manipulating, and attacking their sources of natural and social energy, and their physical, mental, and emotional strengths and weaknesses. And before I pass it off to the rest of you guys, how much of what was just described can be completely applied to our current situation?
Enough to make the argument that nobody can tell you this document is fake. It's that simple. 1-to-1 in the real world. I don't give a damn who published it when. And by the way, what's still stunning about this document is if it's claimed 79 and they're already basing on everything on computer data, that tells you something too. That means they had to be much further along than most people suspect. Just saying.
Absolutely. And, just to think, people don't understand that they're being attacked by a weapon. They don't. And by and large, people just, they intrinsically know something's wrong.
That's because football's
but they
on,
can't
Wayne.
quite put their... Yeah. But they just can't put their finger on it. And that's what this is all about. This is a way of attacking your vitality, your options, your mobility, all of this stuff. And that's exactly what's going on right now. Make sure you maintain social distance of 6 feet between people. Make sure you're wearing your mask out in public. Make sure you're washing your hands and wearing your gloves and ratting out your neighbor if they're outside without their mask. Seriously, what is this doing? This is causing psychological, emotional, and physical harm to people. It really, truly is.
Yeah, with a precedent. Once this gets established, is anyone listening? Do you actually think any of this is going away now that it's been established? Versions of this will be forever if it's allowed to be.
Sure, quite the contrary. And the sad part about this is I was thinking that the question often when you bring up any of these topics again, I have often said that the truth community is something of a misnomer, that really what we do is we spend more of our time deconstructing lies and deception because the truth is a very difficult thing to know with absolution. But one of the first questions that comes up is the appeal to both authority and consensus, but one of them is appeal to incredulity, is that they, the first question they ask is, but why would they lie? And you could just simply print this document out and hand it to them. And the sad thing is that most people, frankly, in today's society, wouldn't understand it.
Because we should be honest about this. This is about being bereft of any spiritual idea that matters. Societies that have a connection spiritually to whatever their tradition is are less likely to fall for these things. And at the base of everything that's driving this is materialism. And for my part, we went hyper-material in the Renaissance. And as science replaced all previous forms of ways of thinking about things, we became super hyper-materialist. And all these things put together make us susceptible. If you get back to being what we call godly or righteous, or using nature as the benchmark for what's true and what's not, it's much harder to pull these things off. I'm just saying.
All right, we ready to move on? Theoretical introduction. Give me control over a nation's currency, and I care not who makes its laws. Attributed to Mayer Amschel Rothschild, 1743 to 1812. Today's silent weapons technology is an outgrowth of a simple idea discovered, succinctly expressed, and effectively applied by the quoted Mr. Mayer Amschel Rothschild. Mr. Rothschild discovered the missing passive component of economic theory known as economic inductance. He, of course, did not think of his discovery in these 20th century terms, and, to be sure, mathematical analysis had to wait for the Second Industrial Revolution, the rise of the theory of mechanics and electronics, and finally, the invention of the electronic computer before it could be effectively applied in the control of the world economy.
There you go, right there. I mean, Rothschild said it, put words to it. Now they refer to it in this document as economic inductance, and that's the piece that I just quoted from further on in the document earlier when we were talking about, what's the point in this whole stimulus bill and stuff that they're doing? Why they're just printing money and giving people money? This is exactly why, because at some point, what's going to happen is everything's going to collapse, and somebody's going to buy up everything for pennies on the dollar, and guess who that's going to be? It's going to be these power brokers at the top that have everything. So they'll just further their wealth and control.
Yeah, in exactly the same way that they did in the 1920s crash. They gave out really cheap, bad loans, and then when people couldn't, when they crashed the economy, people couldn't make the payments, they swooped in and took mostly farmland at the time. So they knew, and also small businesses and manufacturing, they took all the hardware and all the material goods. It's by design, and you can tell exactly that they've used this current situation with the CV-19 specifically to crash the economy to do exactly the same thing.
Well, it's going to be worse this time for here because another thing they're doing is putting everyone on the government tit. They're working towards that check, that subsistence check. And at that point, it's not looking good for anyone. When you have to depend on the very people that just screwed you over to pay your bills, you're in a tight spot.
Yep, and they've already had several reports that people are being invited back to work, and they're saying no thanks because they're getting with the extra stimulus package, and they're offering the PUA pandemic unemployment assistance. They're offering another $600 a week on top of what the regular state stuff is. So people are saying no thanks. I'm doing better on unemployment than they were working. So this universal basic income quote is what's happening, and it gets people absolutely married and completely dependent on the titty.
Plus, it puts them in that permanent database. It's a bit like getting a beer bug test right now. You do that, you've just entered into a database that's never going away.
You mean they might be taking your DNA and putting it in a great big superstructure somewhere?
It also tells them that you're a blind melon because you did it.
This one was dumb.
Oh, right. You're counting your own beans. You're putting yourself in the dipshit list.
Look at this goober coming in with his mask and gloves on. What a maroon.
Yeah, it's it. I often say
that's the thing. Everybody's.
It's not a pandemic, but it's an IQ test, right? With people wearing these masks, and I've been saying that, it's just so ridiculous that, even with our super tight cotton weave, mechanical loom weave, that's going to be 35 to 40 microns between the weft, and even an N95 mask is down to 5 microns, and the supposed pathogen is less than 3 microns. So a screen door on a submarine is more effective, right? And what you're doing.
Hey,
Wait a minute. And so wearing a mask is actually more harmful to the wearer, and it certainly isn't protecting them. So all they're doing is recycling. They're creating a hot, moist condition of recycling, and if anything did get caught in the mask, it'd be right there in front of their airway. So it is really, again, to me, it's more of an IQ test than anything else.
You're just saying that because you want people to die.
You're right. Exactly.
That's the response you get from society at large. It's like ridiculous.
I'm desirous of people to be harmed. That's why I'm trying to help them. That's to help them understand.
Playing chess with a pigeon, right?
That's exactly right. That is exactly my metaphor, Wayne. You know it well.
I do know it well.
There's no point in playing chess with a pigeon because invariably they just flap their wings, knock over all the pieces, shit all over the board, and flap away, claiming victory. So
couldn't you just use the pearl to the swine metaphor? It was a little.
Well, Jesus did it better. I'll admit it. Jesus did it better.
Let's just all agree that we're going to call Jason GJ from now on. Okay.
What happens if I shave, though? I mean. Does that take away the fun?
Well,
then it'll be YGJ.
Well, you can't cut your hair because everybody knows Samson did that, and that'll take your strength away, and then it won't be
That's
such
true.
powerful gravy.
That's true.
So, if I can, Jason, I want to tackle this next section on the general energy concepts because there is some really profound stuff in here, and what I mentioned earlier regarding the specific one-to-one analogy with electronics and the electrical flow. So this is, again, we're reading, for those of you who have just joined us, we're reading
Take this
from...
part because I ran out of water. So you handle this next concept, and by the time you get done with that, I should be to the kitchen and back again.
Perfect. Okay, so for those of you who have just joined us, so again, we're reading "Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars," a document that purportedly came from an IBM copy machine, and it was discovered in the mid 1980s. The document itself is purported to be from 1979, and so we're now early on, still in the early description of what's going on, and this describes general energy concepts. And again, irrespective of whether you think this document is genuine or not, again, these principles are proven and certainly more than plausible, and you can see them happen one-to-one corollary in our society over the past 50 years. So continuing to read now from this document under the heading General Energy Concepts. In the study of energy systems, there always appear three elementary concepts. These are potential energy, kinetic energy, and energy dissipation. And corresponding to these concepts, there are three idealized, essentially pure physical counterparts called passive components. And so number one, in the science of physical mechanics, the phenomenon of potential energy is associated with physical property called elasticity or stiffness. And this can be represented by a stretched spring. In electric science, potential energy is stored in a capacitor instead of a spring. This property is called capacitance instead of elasticity or stiffness, but it represents the same concept. In the science of physical mechanics, the phenomenon of kinetic energy is associated with a physical property called inertia or mass and can be represented by a mass or flywheel in motion. And again, this is analogous to Newton's third law. In electronic science, kinetic energy is stored in an inductor or magnetic field instead of mass, and this property is called an inductance instead of inertia. In the science of physical mechanics, the phenomenon of energy dissipation is associated with a physical property called friction or resistance. Or we would say in the second law of thermodynamics, we would call this entropy. It can be represented by a dashpot or other device which converts energy into heat. In electronic science, dissipation of energy is performed by an element called either a resistor or a conductor. The term resistor, of course, being the one generally used to describe a more ideal device, like a wire, employed to convey electronic energy efficiently from one location to another. And the property of a resistance or conductor is measured either as resistance or conductance reciprocals. And so in economics, these three energy concepts are associated with one, economic capacitance, that's the capital, or money, stock, inventory, investments in buildings, durable goods, etc. Economic conductance, that's goods, the product or flow coefficients. And finally, three, economic inductance, and those are services, the influence of the population on industry as an output. So all the mathematical theory developed in the study of one energy system, like mechanics or electronics, can be immediately applied with the study of any other energy system, for example, economics. And so this analogy, the one-to-one analogy, is completely transferable between any of these things. And so with those same formula and the same description of using a certain amount of entropy, dissolution, that sort of thing, you can immediately analogize whether it's currency or whether it's labor force, any of these energy coefficients into the equation, and you'll get a solution. And so in the same way that you can, for example, understand by knowing how many grains a projectile is, what its rate of fire is, and its trajectory, you can immediately know, by how much energy is put into it and its angle of velocity, you can immediately know what its trajectory is going to be and whether or not you're going to hit the target. And that's exactly true with what we're looking at here. They figured out that an economy, if it can be controlled, is easily manipulated. And not only that, but the emotions of a people is directly correspondent. And so when you began to move these elasticity or inflexibility of financial goods and services, it immediately has a direct effect on whether people try to escape from reality by using drugs or drinking or getting to sex or going to movies. These things are immediately apparent. And especially when they have the data to understand what your strengths and weaknesses are. And make no mistake that everything that you've ever done in your lifetime has been monitored, aggregated, collated, filed away, and there is at least 24 simulations of you specifically running at any one time on a stack of computers just in this country. So again, I don't want to say they got your number, but they're certainly trying to, and using a cybernetic feedback loop, as Wayne and I have described before, they not only predict, but they try to drive it by using what's basically called shock test. It's the idea that if you have an aircraft, right, and it's shooting a weapon, that's going to create stresses on the airframe, and if you get into a certain harmonization with it, and you could literally destroy the airframe. And so you have to do shock test on it to see what rate of fire and what harmonics you can use. Well, they do exactly the same thing with banks now. You hear shock test, and they do test on how much money. They're doing exactly this sort of thing to the entire economy and indeed our society by shocking you into submission, shock and awe.
Right, and it's talked about later on in this document. It talks about that shock testing and explains exactly what you're saying right now. This is exactly what they do to see what kind of resistance they're going to run up against, and to further fine-tune their algorithms and stuff for this stuff. And this is exactly what they're doing. And they're using computers in order to do this, and it's driving all these different simulations. And right now, in addition to just what you were saying about the simulations of each person, they also are running these through different programs, through quantum computers and various other tools that have a higher rate of accuracy and could give them a better degree of understanding as to what their outputs are going to be. So there's actually something called Sentient World Simulation. It's a program running at Purdue University on a D-Wave quantum computer there. And this has pretty much an avatar within the system of every single human being on Earth running in a continuous simulation 24/7, and they could run innumerable situations and different things right down to the individual. I mean, they could do simulations of regions, simulations of entire states or countries or whatever like that, or even right down to, like, say, a particular neighborhood or even individuals. They could run these different simulations and figure out what you're going to be doing tomorrow with probably about 99% accuracy, like right down to the exact minute you'll be doing like this certain activity or whatever. They know what you're going to eat for lunch and when you're going to eat it with these simulations.
Right. According to NSA.gov, right now they claim an accuracy rate of 99.3%, and if that's their claimed rate, then I suspect it's higher than that, right? Yeah. I mean, once you get past about 94%, each decimal point takes orders of magnitude more processing power. But if they're claiming 99.3% accuracy rate, we're close to 99.9% accuracy rate, and that's pretty close.
Yeah, but I think you'll see a rate of 100%. I mean, the more times you do this, the closer to 100. It's not even about computing power anymore. It's about sheer data put through, isn't it? But I would point... It's
the gain, right?
Yeah, I would point out the main takeaway here is that there's one force in the world. It's called electricity, and that's what they're playing on. And that's why when people to go get a PhD as an electrical engineer, they never totally understand how electricity works. Because to allow someone to understand that would be allow them to understand light, water, anything that has energy and movement in our world would then be describable and manipulatable in some way. That's why there's very few Eric Dollards in the world, or supposed Teslas. So right. The main takeaway here is the magic that's being done here is just simply based on the perfection of nature. So they made an artificial system they call an economy or money or society or any damn system they make up, and then they relate it directly to the one force in our world, electricity. And sometimes they mask the language as nautical because waves flow in the same way.
And to piggyback on what you're saying, Crow, is again, since it is electricity, and as you say, the cousin of that is magnetism, and that we all are electromagnetic beings, and that's provable. It's proven that we put out electromagnetic energy. Again, my point being, if you can come more in harmony with the natural environment and step away from their artificial environment, that has the best probability, in my view, of screwing up their algorithms and knocking off their predictions, and their driving of your behavior is to come more in line with the natural world rather than their artificial one.
Yeah, that was my point. To become what we call godly is to simply come in line with the natural world around us, which is perfect. And to use that as the be-all, end-all measure stick against all decisions made. Always compare it to nature. That's the idea of righteousness at the highest level. And I'm with you all day. If people got back to nature and farming and things that were natural, it would not be so easy to see the push around we're getting right now. It's unimaginable to me to go out right now and just look at the number of blind melons kind of zombieing down the street. It's insane. It's almost more than you can take. You have to start to do things with your mind to keep it from going cuckoo. To imagine the I don't even know how to describe it. The number of children that have taken over the adult role.
Learning to Fly, thanks for the super chat, says A is the first letter, I is the ninth. Shall we count?
Yes, we should. And then we should go back to the death of Ajax following or during the Trojan War, and you'll know something more about those two letters.
There you go.
But keep in mind, even within that phrase, it's artificial intelligence.
Artificial,
it's
yes, there you
fake.
are.
It's fake AF. It's not real.
You know what the definition, in one sense, the definition of artificial could be is that if you ever detach anything artificial from the natural systems, it no longer works.
Exactly.
That's a good thing to think about. Any artificial system, I don't give a damn how sophisticated, if it's detached from the reality of our perfect system called nature, it will cease to function.
So did we get through Mr. Rothschild's energy discovery?
If I could just add to what Crow said, and then go there, and I would just add to that if you separate from the source of all power, which to me would be the creator, the natural result is death and decay. It's not a punishment. It's simply the natural result. If you separate from the source of power, you're going to die.
Agreed. All right, so these things about banking are still applied very much today. Mr. Rothschild's energy discovery. Man, can I speak today? What Mr. Rothschild had discovered was the basic principle of power, influence, and control over people as applied to economics. That principle is, when you assume the appearance of power, people soon give it to you. Politicians use this all the time, by the way.
Sure, when you can take sincerity, you got it covered. Sorry.
Mr. Go ahead and try. Go ahead and try to assume that appearance, saying words like teeth. See if you can pull it off.
Mm-hmm. Kiefer.
Mr. Rothschild had discovered that currency or deposit loan accounts had the required appearance of power that could be used to induce people, inductance, with people corresponding to a magnetic field, into surrendering their real wealth in exchange for a promise of greater wealth instead of real compensation. Again, here we are talking about artificial things, aren't we? They would put up real collateral in exchange for a loan of promissory notes. Mr. Rothschild found that he could issue more notes than he had backing for, so long as he had someone's stock of gold as a persuader to show his customers. And this is the essence of where fractional reserve banking came from, of course. Mr. Rothschild loaned his promissory notes to individuals and to governments. These would create overconfidence. Then he would make money scarce, tighten control of the system, and collect the collateral through the obligation of contracts. The cycle was then repeated. These pressures could be used to ignite a war. Then he would control the availability of currency to determine who would win the war. That government, which agreed to give him control of its economic system, got his support. Collection of debts was guaranteed by economic aid to the enemy of the debtor. The profit derived from this economic methodology made Mr. Rothschild all the more able to expand his wealth. He found that the public greed would allow currency to be printed by government order beyond the limits, which is inflation, of backing in precious metal or the production of goods and services. And of course, we've got nothing but a complete runaway economic nightmare, not just in the United States, but everywhere today.
Yeah, it's worldwide, and by intention, they're all in bed together. There's no national boundaries. It's all, they're all together. They're even, now dropping all pretense of being separate, with but few exceptions, just to bring those in line who are not fully on board at this point.
Yeah, and it's definitely very telling, like what's going on in the world today. When you look at just the state of the world right now, this is exactly what's going on. It's a repeat of the same thing. What they're doing is, first of all, he's putting money out there. I'm saying the banking system, let's put it this way. They're putting money out there for everybody right now in these tough economic times because they're shutting everything down. But at some point, what's going to happen is things are going to start to open back up, and businesses that are suffering right now are going to go under, and they're going to get bought up for pennies on the dollar by who? By the people that already have all the wealth to begin with. Your Rothschilds of the world, your Rockefellers of the world, these big corporations, they're going to buy up all of this stuff and, implement total control over it, from the top down and consolidate the wealth once again to the highest tier. And that's what's been going on all throughout all of history. As you can see right here, it's very well spelled out in this document. This is what Rothschild did. He funded both sides of every war. The one that decided to give him control over their banking system, he gave them more money so that they won the war, and then he collected on the debts on it all. When the losing nation or whatever finally conceded to the winning nation, and the winning nation went in and took control of their assets, well, where did those assets go? They went right to Rothschild, right to the banking cartel. And this is how it works. And it's a consolidation, going on throughout all the world now, and they're really not hiding it anymore. I mean, it used to be hidden behind national borders and all these different things, but now it's just corporation. Everything's corporation. All these international quote unquote corporations. This is what's going on, and many of them are all controlled by the same steering committees and stuff at the topmost tiers of these corporations. And these are all these guys that meet, in the Bilderberg conferences and the Trilateral Commission. All of these guys, they're all rubbing elbows together, okay? And that's kind of how this works. It's the same small group of people at the top. I'd say from my research, I think there's roughly about 6,000 people at the top of the power structure that really run everything in the world when it comes down to it. And, this is just basically what's going on. It's more consolidation into this, and like these steering committees of these corporations are the ones running the show right now. So when you have a guy like Bill Gates funding the World Health Organization, don't you think he has a lot of influence there? And then you have these places like the World Health Organization or the CDC, which, by the way, these are not governmental bodies. They have no authority to do the things they're doing, but yet they're doing them anyway. And they're being funded by these guys. Well, when you want to know who's really pulling the strings, who's supplying the money, and that's what you have to look at, because this is who's pulling the strings about 99 times out of 100, is whoever is controlling the purse strings and things. This is who's running stuff, okay? And I can't emphasize this enough. So when you look at the top levels of these things, and you could see just this blatant criminal activity that they're getting away with worldwide right now across national borders and against sovereignties of different peoples, and just all the humanitarian things they're doing wrong right now. It's unfathomable that people are going to put up with this for much longer, and that we've been so blind to this whole thing, this whole situation for so long. And this is what they're striving to do. They're just grasping tighter reins of control of all of these different facets of society, and it's to the point now. It's controlling the behaviors of men, not just economies. It starts with economies, but if you control somebody's influx of money or material goods, or even their food supply, things like that, their basic necessities, then you control them, lock, stock, and barrel, and that's what it's about.
What's interesting about this, though, if you think about a thing, so all the things about society and the manipulation of people, they've pretty much been accomplished, one thing after the other. But you know what? The Constitution still exists, and they're still having presidents swear fealty to uphold it to the best of their ability. So it will be interesting. They have to get rid of that document. Officially, at some point, it has to get buried in a way where they don't have to worry about it. Because, as you pointed out, these are not governmental agencies. So technically, the government only has the power to do treaties, but a treaty can only be done with another nation. So things like the WHO or any of these places, UN, but these are not nations. As a matter of fact, when you look at the European Union, that's probably not even definable as a nation. So somehow the Constitution will have to be officially buried at some point for this to be safe.
I think all they have to do is suspend it. I mean, from my perspective, the Constitution has been, but it's sort of an illusion. It's a promise that's never kept. So it gives everybody. It's sort of like I would say the analogy now is Q, right?
But they faked it though. They faked like they were keeping it, even though we know they violated it openly since '33. Other people will make 1871 or something like that.
They're 1871 for sure.
Yeah, but the point is every president is still, for some reason, standing up to swear fealty to it. And so that's a problem that doesn't go away with just, I mean, it still exists. Someone could leverage that out. So that's a chink in the armor.
I would postulate that it is certainly a brilliant document that outlines what our rights are. Again, I see that they are not certainly following it, and I don't know that there's a magic word that's going to make them back up come on, man. We both know there's no magic word, but there might be 300 million magic words. That's the point I would make.
The point that word is no.
Right. But if we could get the people to do it and we're simply waking them up, that is the challenge. And I think that's what we're trying to do here. I see the time, and I want to just kind of point out that based on what Wayne said, I mean, we may not get to it in the terms of the document. Again, I would highly recommend that everybody who's listening tonight look for this document. You can find it all over the internet and read it through very thoroughly. But one of the things to be certain is, again, to go back to the idea that controlling the economy controls the people, and it controls their emotions, and it controls what they do. But beyond that, this clearly states out that the flywheel for the economy is war. War has inherent waste, both in terms of financial, emotional, and certainly human resources. It throws people into cannon fodder. And when people, the sons of mothers and fathers die, it breaks them emotionally, and it creates confusion and chaos. But it also creates inherent waste, and it derives the economy. This is the number one flywheel throughout our nation's history, and certainly in the United States, is that our entire economy has relied on war since since the Second World War, certainly, whether or not we've been in an official state of war, which hasn't happened since. That is the flywheel, and it's
but again, what we're talking about here, Baldini, is pretend. It's this brings us back to, when is lie not a lie? A lie is not a lie when it's acting. Well, that's not true, but that's what's accepted as true. That's what's passed around in that community is true, but on the face of it, it's provably not true. A lie is a lie, and a lie will always be a lie. And the things you're pointing out are things we fake like we're doing. Like we're fake like we're going to war without ever declaring it.
People are still dying, right? I mean, that's
really not the point at the base of it, though, from my point of view, because if people got fed up enough, there is, in fact, a foundation there that could be demanded back. But you make a very valid point. 10 of us screaming ain't going to do it. 100,000 of us doing it probably won't do it. But if everyone got fed up, or most of everyone, they'd have a serious problem.
Well, I'm with you all day long on that.
You can't deny that Trump just swore fealty to the Constitution, or anyone before him, which means they recognize it. It's a bit like putting a Bible in a courtroom, right? It's a bit like that.
Well, I mean, here's where I'm coming from, is that there is, to a degree, I mean, if you want to base it on the limbic system, people perceive the world in the way that they already believe. They're predisposed, and in fact, they will change the incoming data to match what it is and comport with what it is they already believe. So they will actually experience it differently. So those, for example, who believe that they're on a spinning space rock, they can get in a plane and believe that they saw the curvature of the Earth. Right. So to a degree, it manifests itself, at least in their own reality. To a degree, again, that's what I think we are up against right now, is to get a number of people to wake up to where we can hit the tipping point where they say enough is enough. And this latest situation right now, I've tried to point out, is it's kind of Maybe the silver lining is, again, it gives people some opportunity to back up and give a moment to consider things, because one of the things, again, plainly pointed out in this document, is that in order to create chaos, they keep people so busy they don't have time to look. And in the awakening study that I'm doing, one of the key elements is that people have the time to take a look at these things and to research them and consider them. And so with a number of people having to stop and pause, again, it presents an opportunity. As bad as things are out there, there is a possibility that we could use it to our advantage. And so, again, I think that's what we're all trying to do here, is to spread enough truth to get people to wake up, so that there are enough people to say, no, we do not consent.
You know, my main point, I guess, is if you're a werewolf, pretty sure you don't want any silver bullets in the room. If you're a vampire, you're not going to hang out around wooden stakes. And to me, that document is the silver bullet. It is the wooden stake, or it could be. The likelihood of it being used, I'm with you. It's slim, so slim. But the point is if you're going to dot all these I's and cross all these T's and slash all these damn Q's for a couple hundred years setting this up, are you really going to leave a wooden stake and a silver bullet laying around? I would just suggest that it's an interesting thing to keep an eye on. Because from my point of view, there has to be some official move to do away with it once and for all.
Perhaps.
I would concur, too.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that if they say that it's suspended for reasons of national security, again, unless we say no, they'll just do it. And I mean, they kind of have already by creating these lockdowns, right? And the latest I've seen, the news reports call the Constitution a culture. Right,
that's like a good one. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So when they're changing the wording like that and then creating this new interpretation of words as they do, again is pointed out very clearly in this document over and over, is that they must have consent. If we say no, that's the end of the game. If we all stand up and say no, game over. But everything that they do is to manufacture consent, and in that regard, they've done an excellent job. And of course, they're using everything from magic spells, as we've talked about, to full spectrum programming, to subliminal programming, and every tool of the book, power of suggestion, everything that they can to gain that consent. And for most people, and for many people, it's broader than the standard Pareto distribution. It is very effective because they're using all sorts of things, including peer pressure and that sort of stuff. But again, the better job that we do at waking people up and at least casting aspersions and doubt on the official narrative, the better chance we have of getting people to say, no, I do not consent. Because when we say no, game over.
Well, here, I'll tell you what, guys. I got to get up early to get 215 out the door. I'm going to bow out. Wayne, Jason, Baldini, everyone in the chat, have a good night.
And do a quick mention on what we're releasing tomorrow, Crow?
Tomorrow we're going to have the director of the Walter Russell Museum, Matt Presti, is coming on. And if you've understood half of what's been laid down here today, you'll see why Walter Russell's work is so important. He's basically telling you what the people who are running the economy as an electrical circuit knew, and he knew it way back in the 30s. The man is claimed to have spent 39 days in illumination, which is the equivalent of a glimpse of heaven for a Christian, or becoming enlightened from an Eastern religion. He wrote a book called The Universal One that has been edited exactly 0 times since the time he wrote it after being in illumination. That's what's coming out tomorrow. Big ideas, by the way, we're going to follow with the chief science officer of the Walter Russell Museum probably in a couple, 2-3 weeks. Anyhow, guys, have a good night, and good night, everyone in the chat.
Good night, Crow. Talk to you tomorrow, man.
Good night, Crow. Have a good night.
All right, I think we
Walter
should,
Russell.
Walter Russell, good stuff, man. I'm going to be working on that.
Good stuff. Not to be confused with the Dalt Wisney Corporation. So don't get those two confused.
So let's jump down to economic shock testing, because I think we just saw some examples of that, if I'm not mistaken. In recent times, the application of operations research to the study of the public economy has been obvious for anyone who understands the principles of shock testing. In the
you want to back up to the breakthrough section to explain that shock testing better than I did? I mean, they go
into a little bit here, and there's so much there, and we don't have a lot of time left.
Gotcha. Okay.
In
so
the
just
shock
remember
testing,
what I said about shock testing and how it works. Okay, now go ahead.
In the shock testing of an aircraft airframe, The recoil impulse of firing a gun mounted on that airframe causes shock waves in that structure, which tell aviation engineers the conditions under which some parts of the airplane, or the whole airplane, or its wings, will start to vibrate or flutter like a guitar string, a flute reed, or a tuning fork, and disintegrate or fall apart in flight. And it's quite interesting that all the things they mentioned there were all musical frequency intonation kind of things. These guys don't miss much. Economic engineers achieve the same result in studying the behavior of the economy and the consumer public by carefully selecting a staple commodity such as beef, coffee, gasoline, or sugar, and then causing a sudden change or shock in its price or availability, thus kicking everybody's budget and buying habits out of shape. I think one example anybody who's a little older might know is the Great Gas Crisis, the two of them that happened in the 1970s. Big example of that.
Now we have toilet paper. They're using butt wipe.
Right. They then observe the shock waves which result by monitoring the changes in advertising, prices, and sales of that and other commodities. The objective of such studies is to acquire the know-how to set the public economy into a predictable state of motion or change, even a controlled self-destructive state of motion, which will convince the public that certain expert, quote-unquote, people should take control of the money system and reestablish security rather than liberty and justice for all. When the subject citizens are rendered unable to control their financial affairs, they, of course, become totally enslaved, a source of cheap labor. Not only the prices of commodities, but also the availability of labor can be used as the means of shock testing. Labor strikes deliver excellent shocks to an economy, especially in the critical service areas of trucking or transportation, communication, and public utilities such as energy, water, and garbage collection, etc. By shock testing, it is found that there is a direct relationship between the availability of money flowing in an economy and the real psychological outlook and response of masses of people dependent upon that availability. For example, there is a measurable quantitative relationship between the price of gasoline and the probability that a person would experience a headache, feel a need to watch a violent movie, smoke a cigarette, or go to a tavern for a mug of beer. It is most interesting that, by observing and measuring the economic models by which the public tries to run from their problems and escape from reality, and by applying the mathematical theory of operations research, it is possible to program computers to predict the most probable combination of created events or shocks, which will bring about a complete control and subjugation of the public through a subversion of the public economy by shaking the plum tree. Do you think they just did that in the past 6 weeks?
Might I interject something very important that's going on in front of our eyes right now? What they're trying to do right now is create an artificial food shortage, and they're doing so by shutting down these meat processing plants, first of all. And second of all, if you watch what's been going on, farmers have been being forced to dump out their milk and destroy livestock and stuff like that. There's no shortage of food. I mean, there's abundance of food. It's just they're being forced by financial means to do this stuff.
And they're blaming it on and you see them transportation, right, as an artificial means, artificially. It is, again, it's criminal in every sense of the imagination.
It truly is.
And
it truly is.
I'd like to.
And this is. Go ahead.
Good. No, go ahead, Wayne, because I want to bounce from where Jason was reading to this other section here, which really puts a fine point on it. So go ahead and finish your thought.
Okay. Well, what I was saying is they're trying to create this artificial food shortage because this is the shock test that they're going to use right now to try to bring everybody into compliance. So watch, the next couple weeks are crucial as it comes to this because there's no shortage of food supply. Okay, there's no shortage of it, but what they're doing is they're creating an artificial scarcity of it by destroying excess product because there's an overabundance of it. So rather than actually producing it and sending it out to market and bringing the prices down, they're creating this artificial scarcity, which is so in key with what they need for the model that they're doing right now with this. So this is what they're doing. They're creating the artificial scarcity, and they're also decimating this labor force to actually manufacture the goods and bring the goods to market as well to create this scarcity. And this will actually bring people to their knees. I mean, if you can't get food, you're in big trouble. And we're basically a very, we're, as far as the society goes, there's not many people that know how to grow their own food or anything anymore. We're not self-sufficient in that way. So if you're a consumer society, you're going to have a major problem when they do this. And this is like one of the ultimate shock tests that they're doing right now. And we're watching it in live time. So we need to speak up and shut this thing down. I think it's actually a good thing. I know people are criticizing Trump for this, but he wants to keep these meat processing plants open through this. And I mean, and there's a whole separate agenda that goes with this. And if Crow was still here, I wanted to discuss this with him, maybe at a future time. But I think this goes back once again to the whole push for the veganism thing. Once again, with everything going on with this meat processing thing, and the meat shortage that they're saying is coming because I just happened to have the TV on earlier today, and there was a news story there talking about, expect, maybe you're going to see meat disappearing off the shelves in the store within the next week or so. Here's some vegetarian recipes where you could get your protein, and it was a whole segment where they went through and they were cooking beans and stuff and showing you, you could make this peanut butter sauce and this kind of thing. And that really hit me hard. I thought, okay, here it comes. This is the whole meat eater versus vegetarian thing again. This is once again drawing analogies to the Cain and Abel story and this whole dichotomy between that.
In addition,
it never ends.
Yeah, in addition, they're touting, and this is exactly the time that they're doing it, they're touting the lab-grown meats. And there were a few articles already coming out that some of the lab-grown meats that they're using now, and again, this is just, they take and clone cells and turn it into, lab Franken meats. But some of them that they're using now are actually human tissue that come from celebrities. So you can eat your favorite star.
What?
And so, I saw that. That's disturbing in and of itself.
A Hank's burger. Ew.
So here you get Soylent Green, but you can eat Lady Gaga. So when they say "bite me," I guess they mean it. So getting back to the idea of
she was
cannibalism,
cloned that way.
Yeah, forced cannibalism. So I did want to get this little section in here with the shock test, and especially the way this wraps up. Now, consider again, keep in mind that this document came out in 1976, and they had to explain a few things here. But the shock application of shock testing in economics, and again, this is back to the document, Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. To use this method of airframe shock testing in economic engineering, the prices of commodities are shocked, and the public consumer reaction is monitored. Again, that's what we're seeing right now. The resulting echoes of the economic shock are then interpreted theoretically by computers, and the psychoeconomic structure of the economy is thus discovered. It's by this process that the partial differential and difference price matrices are discovered that define the family household and make possible its evaluation as an economic industry or dissipative consumer structure. Then the response of the household to the future shocks can be predicted and manipulated, and society becomes a well-regulated animal with its reins tightly under the control of a sophisticated computer-regulated social energy bookkeeping system. And again, this is what we would talk about, a cybernetic feedback loop. Now, listen closely to this entire paragraph. Eventually, every individual element of the structure comes under computer control through a knowledge of personal preferences. Keep in mind, this is 1976, guys. Such knowledge guaranteed by Computer Association of Consumer Preferences, Universal Product Code, and again, they have to explain it here, UPC, zebra-striped pricing codes on packages, with identified consumers, identified via association with the use of a credit card, and later a permanent tattooed body number, invisible under normal ambient illumination. They're already talking about a tattoo on your body, or now an RFID chip. 1976.
Right. Well, there you go. Let's jump down to Introduction to Economic Amplifiers, because this is also very much seen today. Economic amplifiers are the active components of economic engineering. The basic characteristic of any amplifier, whether it be mechanical, electrical, or economic, is that it receives an input control signal and delivers energy from an independent energy source to a specified output terminal in a predictable relationship to that input control signal. The simplest form of an economic amplifier is a device called, anyone know? Advertising. Bernays was really good at advertising.
Thank you, Bernays.
If a person is spoken to by a TV advertiser as if he were a 12-year-old, then due to suggestibility, he will, with a certain probability, respond or react to that suggestion with the uncritical response of a 12-year-old and will reach into his or her economic reservoir and deliver its energy to buy that product on impulse when they pass the store. Yeah, and just think about how much you're bombarded just looking at any freaking website these days. I've literally had to teach myself to tune it out. There's so much bullshit on it nowadays. There's more bullshit than article or whatever it is you happen to be looking at. So, an economic amplifier... I'm sorry?
Fertilizer.
Yeah. An economic amplifier may have several inputs and output. Its response might be instantaneous or delayed. Its circuit symbol might be a rotary switch if its options are exclusive, qualitative, go or no-go, or it might have its parametric input-output relationships specified by a matrix with internal energy sources represented. Whatever its form might be, its purpose is to govern the flow of energy from a source to an output sink in direct relationship to an input control signal. For this reason, it is called an active circuit element or component. Electronic amplifiers fall into classes called strategies, and in comparison with electronic amplifiers, the specific internal functions of an economic amplifier are called logistical instead of electrical. Therefore, economic amplifiers not only deliver power gain, but also in effect are used to cause changes in the economic circuitry. All right. If you guys want to discuss that for a moment, we're running out of time. There's something I really want to get to in this document. I'm going to get
the list of
here.
inputs.
I'm sorry?
The list of inputs.
Well, you can go through that if you would like. There's a section towards the end I want to really get to before we go over time here.
Yeah, I'd like to blow through that list of inputs really quickly, just so you can understand and put this into context. So again, what they're talking about in the previous couple of paragraphs, they're talking about economic amplifiers drive power gain, and so you need to amplify the signal. And so part of that is determined by the available input signals and the desired output. But the short list of inputs, and this is again, keep in mind the context of when this was done. Again, apparently written in 1976.
79, I think it is actually.
I'm sorry, 79. Yeah. The questions to be answered, what, where, why, when, how, and who. That's pretty basic. General sources of information, telephone taps, analysis of garbage, surveillance, behavior of children in school, the standard of living by food, shelter, clothing, transportation, their social contacts, including telephone, itemized record of calls, family, marriage certificates, birth certificates, and so forth, friends and associations, membership in organizations, and your political affiliation, a personal paper trail, which would now be your electronic footprint, your buying habits, personal consumer preferences, checking accounts, credit card purchases, tagged credit card purchases, and that includes UPC. And again, at the time this was out, barely 15% of anything had a UPC code on it. Your assets, including your savings and checking accounts, real estate, business, automotive, etc. Liabilities, loans, government sources, welfare, grants, Social Security, that sort of thing. Principal deploy, citizen will almost always make a collection of information easy if they operate on the free sandwich principle. Eat now, pay later. And again, this is in part why you've been asked to sign up for Shoppers Club at a grocery store, right? You get a discount if you sign up for their club, and sometimes it's 50%. I mean, you almost can't shop without joining these things. But again, what this does is it gives them access to all of your purchasing habits, and by again, it requires your commitment and your acceptance of it, right? You consent. And so they must rule by consent. But again, they take these habit patterns and now they go into programming. So strengths and weaknesses like activities, sports, hobbies, psychiatric records, whether you're susceptible to hypnosis. Again, they specifically outline this. Your methods of coping, of adaptability, behavior, consumption of alcohol, drugs, entertainment, religious factors, payment modus operandi. Do you pay on time? What are your energy purchases, water purchases? Again, these are all the input variables that they're looking for. And again, this was back then. This is well before they had all the input data that they have now. And they were able to create really solid models just with paper trails. And now it's all electronic. So just keep in mind, this specifically outlines their entire plan. It's an overview, but with some actually nuts and bolts. So again, this is called Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. Highly recommended reading. Go ahead, Jason.
I want to get down to page 35 if anybody's following along here. But all right, so the personal paper trail that you just mentioned, just all of these things that are listed in this document. I'm not going to go reading through all this stuff, but if you get this thing, and it's a free PDF, you can find it easily enough. Rose has linked to it a bunch of times in the chat room. You'll see that they just make little files about everybody, and they know what's going on. But let me jump down to page 35 here. It's called the Table of Strategies. And on the left-hand side, it says do this, and on the right side, it says to get this. This is about as simplistic as you can get for these controllers.
Sleep well.
Yeah, it's like, do this, here you go. Okay, so here's their little list. Keep the public in. You do this, you keep the public ignorant. To get this, less public organization. So, I'm not going to break it down for you, but I think you can easily apply that to the current situation. Next, maintain access to control, prices, and points for feedback. Required reaction to outputs and sales. Next, create preoccupation. This lowers defenses. Attack the family unit young. Control of the education. Give less cash and more data, credit cards, and doles. This leads to more self-indulgence. And, well, that's something they went into in great detail here that we kind of glossed over, but they really made a big deal about how credit and loans and all that kind of thing led to massive self-indulgence, especially at what they're calling the lowest class of people. Next,
and also that's self-control, right? That you don't have the self-control.
Right, and they're saying you're no better than animals.
And I'll pay later. Yeah.
If we throw this at you, you'll take it and run with it and do exactly what you want. But then we've got you in debt slavery. So, and that's the basic premise here. Attack the privacy of the church. Destroy faith in this sort of government. Social conformity leads to computer programming simplicity. I think that's what we've been seeing playing out here.
Yeah, they're wearing a mask. They're conforming.
They got it. They're complying. Minimize the tax protest. Maximize economic data. Minimum enforcement problems. Stabilize the consent. Simplicity coefficients. Tighten control of variables. Simpler computer input data. Greater predictability. Establish boundary conditions. Problem simplicity solutions of differential and difference equations. Proper timing. Less data shift and blurring. Maximize control. Minimum resistance to that control. And collapse of currency. Destroy the faith of the American people in each other. So what does this lead up to? Diversion, the primary strategy. Do you guys have anything you want to break down on what we just did, though?
I think that's self-explanatory, and this is the big one. Diversion is the primary strategy.
Right.
Keep you so busy, so distracted, so focused on stupid things. Tiger King, that sort of stuff, right? So
watch the man with the mullet.
Exactly. Talking about nonsense. So whether it's Game of Thrones or whether it's Tiger King or whatever, or politics, right? Just WWE wrestling with a different kind of suit. That's how they get you. You don't have any time to think about it.
So diversion, the primary strategy. Let's get through this before we call it a night. Experience has proven that the simplest method of securing a silent weapon and gaining control of the public is to keep the public undisciplined and ignorant of the basic system principles on the one hand, while keeping them confused, disorganized, and distracted with matters of no real importance on the other hand. Hey, did you see the game last night? Sports ball!
That's sports ball. Yeah, exactly.
Hooray! Sports ball! And this is called cybernetics, folks. The name of this science is called cybernetics.
Tom Brady went to Tampa Bay, man. This is exciting.
So this is achieved by disengaging their minds, sabotaging their mental activities, providing a low-quality program of public education in mathematics, logic, systems design, and economics, and discouraging technical creativity.
Or even understanding.
Yeah, well. Engaging their emotions, increasing their self-indulgence and their indulgence in emotional and physical activities by unrelenting emotional affrontations and attacks, mental and emotional rape by way of constant barrage of sex, violence, and wars in the media, especially television and the newspapers. Today, of course, we would add in the internet. Giving them, and social media specifically, giving them what they desire in excess, junk food for thought, and depriving them of what they really need. Oh, in this last one, this is great. Rewriting history and law and subjecting the public to the deviant creation, thus being able to shift their thinking from personal needs to highly fabricated outside priorities. These preclude their interest in and discovery of the silent weapons of social automation technology. The general rule is that there is a profit in confusion. The more confusion, the more profit. Therefore, the best approach is to create problems and then offer solutions. Does that sound familiar to anyone?
Yes, and don't forget, please do include the diversion summary.
Yep, we're going to get there in a moment.
Because this is so important, just so important.
Yep.
Oh, Wendell Strong, thanks for the super chat. Do you think Venus is self-illuminating? I am probably not the best person to answer that, but I will certainly ask Crow for you. Do either of you gentlemen want to make a comment on that?
I'm going to say they're all luminaries, so to some degree, yes.
Right. Wayne, anything you want to add there?
The simple answer is I don't know. So, it's one of those things. It's very subjective. It looks to me like it's self-lit. It just doesn't make sense to me that the stars that we see up there are supposedly self-illuminated, but these planets that we can see up there that look pretty much exactly the same to the naked eye as the stars are not. It's a reflection. I don't know. It doesn't make sense in a logical capacity, but I don't know.
All right, so let's get to the diversion summary. In media, keep the adult public attention diverted away from the real social issues and captivated by matters of no real importance. And today with celebrities, blah, blah, blah. There you go. Schools, keep the young public ignorant of real mathematics, real economics, real law, and real history. In entertainment, keep the public entertainment below a 6th grade level. Work.
I think we can easily demonstrate that.
Easily. And work, this is one I've thought about many, many times. Keep the public busy, with no time to think, back on the farm with the other animals. And they make it enough so that everyone has to work nowadays. If you want to have even a decent house, unless you have a very high-paying job, you have both parents or whatever you've got going on in your family situation working these days, which leads to another one of their things, that the state's going to step in and take care of the children. So this is a win-win for them. They've destroyed the economy enough that the classical old-school nuclear family where the dad goes to work can afford the nice house with the white picket fence, and they can have a car, and they can go on vacations, and the mom is the homemaker. Those weren't bad things, folks. I know that a lot of this destructive feminism convinced people that that's shit, but it's not shit. That doesn't mean everyone has to conform to every norm, but that was not a bad situation. Everyone should be free to do what they want, of course, and I would never say no. All right, gentlemen. you want to go into consent the primary victory, or is everyone getting tired?
I think that is probably all you need to say is consent is the primary victory. And they get consent. Again, they've got what they need. But when you don't consent, game over. And for us, the goal is to get enough people to wake up to say, we do not consent.
Well, let's read this first paragraph and we can call it there. So, for consent, the primary victory, a silent weapon system operates upon data obtained from a docile public by legal but not always lawful force. Much information is made available to silent weapon systems programmers through the Internal Revenue Service or the IRS. How about those apples, ladies and gentlemen?
Well, there you go.
All right.
So if you haven't read this document for yourself, we skipped over quite a bit of it, but it outlines very clearly what their goals are. And again, this goes back many decades now, and clearly states that this is actually the 25th anniversary of their original ideas. So they had much time to create a number of victories. Keep in mind at the glacial pace at which this goes, and again, to me, it precludes the idea of just regular humans, regardless of how smart they are. When you combine all the things that we see with the use of gematria, numerology, all the things that happen that seem so tied in, it does seem as though there is some sort of, you want to say, external force driving this, and people are simply themselves consenting to be puppets in the game. As long as they get some temporal power and control, they get what they want out of it. That seems to me to be the case here. But again, I'm with Wayne with most of it going, I don't really know for sure. These are just hypotheticals that seem, with a preponderance of evidence, to seem the most likely scenario from my perspective.
Yeah, just in closing with all of this, what you have to remember is they need your consent in order to achieve all of these things, and they view your consent as your lack of speaking out against this or speaking up against this. So if you're just one of those people that's just going to go along to get along, or just because it's convenient or whatever. If you're one of those people that's going in the grocery store and you just throw on the mask just because you don't want to make a stink, you just want to get in there and get your food and get out, that's compliance in their view. That's your consent. I mean, that's the thing, because even though you don't like it, you're not actively doing anything to speak out against it.
Silence is tacit approval. Yes.
Right. Silence is your tacit consent to this. And this is a principle that I call metaphysical consent. This is what they do all the time with all this different stuff. They view your lack of speaking out against it as your consent to it. So if you don't say nothing about it and just go along to get along, then that's your consent, and they'll roll right over you. They'll steamroll right over you. And we can see just the amount of ridiculousness that this has gotten to already. I mean, here where I'm at in Pennsylvania, the governor put out an executive order that says everybody has to wear a mask out in public. I don't know how many people I saw driving around today in their cars by themselves with a mask on. I mean, come on. Let's get real here. That's just the height of just stupid compliance. I got to say it. It's stupid compliance. Why are you in a car by yourself, nobody else with you, and you're wearing a mask? It's psychological.
You're telegraphing
it really
that
is.
You're a good sheeple citizen.
Right, and then you start to factor in things that are coming in the near future here, like a social credit score, and this is something that's going to be just a dystopian kind of place I don't want to be in. So I'm gonna speak out against it and be loud and vociferous about it. And I don't care if people want to think I'm an evil person for that. Let them think that. I don't care. Somebody's got to speak up and say something, because this is just not going to fly. This is not the future I want for my children. I don't want to have them, afraid to leave the house, that they're not going to be able to go anywhere without their travel papers, or putting on their mask, or this kind of thing. And like we've said earlier, this stuff's not going away, folks. They rolled it out. People have largely complied with it, all because of an invisible threat that may or may not exist. It's the whole foundation of this whole thing is fraudulent. It's fraudulent. Let's face it. They never first of all, proved properly through the science, the scientific method that they love so much. They never truly proved that, first of all, that this virus even, first of all, exists in the way they explain that it does, and second of all, that it's the thing that's making people sick. They've never established that scientifically. It's all based on fraud. It's a lie. There's a great article out today by, what is that gentleman's name? I could picture it, John Rappaport. Mm-hmm. He just put out this great article today that just very succinctly and quickly explains why it's fraud. And it's perfect. And our friend Dr. Andrew Kaufman has been speaking about this too. And he's, really put out a great argument about this. So even if you accept this whole viral theory, it hasn't been proven. It has not been proven by the very standards that they put in place and supposedly tested it for. It has not been proven. So this is not science. This is scientism. This is, on the face of it, scientism, and this whole thing is based on fraud when it comes down to it. I cannot be silent about this anymore. It's all based on fraud. People are running around scared, wearing a face mask and everything.
Oh, did we lose Wayne? Baldini?
Well, I'm still here, but and moreover, while we wait for Wayne to rejoin, they censor any dissenting narrative. So Dr. Kaufman, a couple of epidemiologists from Kern County who were saying some things. So when they began to openly censor any dissenting views, again, keep in mind that truth fears no scrutiny or discovery. In fact, it rather enjoys being out in the light.
Can you hear me?
We hear you now. Yeah, you got cut off like in mid-sentence there, dude.
Wow. That was creepy. Like, I just totally got cut off for no apparent reason whatsoever.
Well, I dropped you to reconnect to see if that was the problem.
Yeah, I don't know what had happened there. That's weird. My connection on my end seems fine. I don't know.
Yeah, well, big surprise there, dude.
What was that new update from Bill Gates you got?
Right, I've got a new update for everybody. Just roll up your sleeve.
Yeah, it might be. Might just be that. I don't know.
All right, anybody want to give some final thoughts here before we sign off for the night?
Wayne, you go.
Just don't be afraid, folks. I mean, by and large, there's nothing out there to really be afraid of, to the extent that they want you to be afraid of. And second of all, let's not be compliant to tyranny. Let's learn our lesson from what little of the historical record we could look back at and accurately be able to assess. It's a road we don't want to go down. I don't want to live under authoritarianism. It's just not the place for me. So, I mean, I'm sure I speak for everybody. Nobody wants to live under that kind of fear or threat. You know what I mean? It's not a future that we want for our children. It's not a future we want for our country. And we need to just speak up and just not tolerate the nonsense anymore, because most of it's nonsense when it comes down to it. And they're just, giving us all these ridiculous demands, and everybody's just kowtowing to it. And it's not going away. That's the problem. Like this whole thing out in public wearing masks, all of these different measures that they've put in place, it's not going away. And they keep egging you on. Oh, we'll see. We'll give it 2 weeks, and then we'll start easing back restrictions. And then those 2 weeks come up. Oh, it's going to be another 2 weeks. And they keep going and going and going. And it's not going away, because they're handling this situation completely wrong, even if you agree with the mainstream narrative of it. But the point being is we need to speak up and say, no, take away your consent from their system, and their system crumbles.
Yeah, and they are clearly telling you that this is the new normal. As Wayne says, it's not going away. They're telling you this is the new normal. They're trying to open that Overton window yet again, even wider. From my perspective, I would say, as I've said before, for everyone, I would strongly encourage everyone to determine for themselves where that place is, what the threshold is, where they're going to say no, and come to that place in their mind now So when they get there, they don't have to think about it, that they know where that place is, that they do not consent. And I would also strongly encourage, that, as I see more and more people, one of the things in the cybernetic feedback loop and what we see being driven in the media is a continued amplification of emotion and polarization between sides. And I would strongly encourage, earlier the question was asked if you ever got into a physical conflict, and we all said no, of course not, but there have been words, and usually this is started by the other side. But I would strongly encourage to keep in mind that those who are still asleep, although they may be your outspoken enemy at this point, that is their view, and we are not enemies of them. They are deceived, and even repeating a lie, for most people, they believe they're sincere, but sincerely mistaken, most of them. So keep in mind that harshing them or calling them names. I mean, we do sometimes use the term normie, or I sometimes will say, the wool-wearing folks, or they wear the wool pantsuit, but that's an identifier. There is, I think, a certain level of epithet there that we kind of a little bit mock them as we talk to each other, but especially as you talk to them. I think that the best course of action is to show them compassion and be kind to one another. It does, from my perspective, responding and acting from a place of love breaks their system, and that's not what they expect or want to see. And so we're doing the opposite than what they want, which is when we do not respond out of hatred, anger, amplified emotion, but then we respond in a carefully considered method and with compassion and care for other living beings. I think we stand a better chance of awakening people till we get to the tipping point, and then when more and more of us say no, we do not consent, that's our opportunity.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to bring us to a close this evening. But as you can see in why we broke down this document, they've had this stuff in mind for a very, very long time, and this really just lays it out plain and clear. The technology may have moved along since this thing was supposedly written in 1979, but it's obvious that they knew what they were doing, and the technology just helped them do it even more. So that's going to do it for us. I bid everyone a great night. Hopefully you join us for the new episode of Crow 777 Radio tomorrow, and have a great night, everyone.
Will speak. the living story. Take my hand and let's fly away. Manifest inside me, my angel. The universe will speak. Manifest inside me, my angel, for all to see. Manifest inside me, my angel. The universe will speak. Manifest inside me, my angel, for all to see. Manifest inside me, my angel. The universe will speak. Manifest inside me, my angel, for all to see.